The Wild West was a lot more than duels and heroic cowboys. Between the mid-19th century and the beginning of the 20th, the expansion of the United States came with hidden interests, brutal conflicts, and unlikely alliances. Here you'll discover 25 little-known episodes that reveal the hidden side of this constantly contested frontier. Number 1. The agency that hunted outlaws. Long before the FBI even existed, one name was already making criminals tremble from coast to coast: Pinkerton. Founded in 1850 by Allan Pinkerton, the agency specialized in hunting down train robbers, bank robbers, and gunmen who crossed borders like there were no laws at all. To do that, it built something rare for the time: organized files with photos, detailed descriptions, nicknames, cities they frequented, and even possible accomplices, an early version of what would become police databases. The investigators also tried methods that seem obvious today, like comparing hand marks and keeping any recurring clue. It wasn't very scientific, but it already pointed toward the use of fingerprints and technical forensics that would only really take off decades later. Among their most famous targets was Jesse James and his gang. The Pinkertons never caught him, but they turned the gang's life into a constant game of running, informants, and cramped hideouts. Over time, the agency stopped working only on hunting outlaws and started protecting politicians, tycoons, and big companies. It gained a reputation as an unofficial arm of law and order, always ready to act where the state was slow to show up. For some, it was a guarantee of safety. For others, a feared private power, able to decide who deserved to be hunted in the name of the law. Number 2. The strange gold and diamond scam. In 1872, the gold rush was still echoing across the United States when two quiet men, Philip Arnold and John Slack, announced they had found a secret diamond field in the mountains of Colorado. The story spread through the financial salons, and in no time, bankers, politicians, and mining entrepreneurs were fighting for a seat in the meetings where the deal of the century was whispered about, as if it were a secret reserved for a chosen few. The trick was simple. Before each visit, Arnold and Slack scattered diamonds, rubies, and other gems bought in far-off markets over the surface of the ground. When the investors arrived, just a few shovels of dirt were enough for the first stones to appear, shining in the sun. The feeling of standing in front of an incredible mine smothered any caution, and contracts were signed in a rush, driven by the fear of missing out on a supposedly once-in-a-lifetime chance. The act seemed solid until geologist Clarence King was called in to evaluate the discovery. When he examined the land and the samples, he realized nothing matched. The type of rock, the wear on the gems, and even the cuts showed they hadn't formed there. The stones had been planted. His report tore down the whole show, exposed the scam, and reminded everyone how even the most experienced people can become easy prey when greed takes over. Number 3. Bass Reeves, inspiration for the Lone Ranger. Son of enslaved people in the American South, Bass Reeves grew up knowing violence and control up close. Still young during the Civil War, he got into a conflict with his own owner and realized that if he wanted to stay alive, he'd have to disappear. He fled toward Indian Territory, the region that today is Oklahoma, taking only his courage and the decision to never again accept slavery. There, among native nations, he learned languages, picked up customs and roots, and earned the trust of leaders who welcomed him as an ally. That period shaped his sense of justice and also gave him something rare for a black man at that time: a network of protection and belonging. With the end of the war and the formal abolition of slavery, Reeves was invited to serve as a U.S. Deputy Marshal west of the Mississippi River. He became the first black man to hold that position in the region, working alongside Judge Isaac Parker at the Fort Smith District Court. Disciplined, strategic, and blessed with a sharp memory, he built an almost legendary reputation. Over the course of his career, he arrested more than 3,000 wanted people, many of them considered impossible to catch, and helped redefine the presence of the law in the Wild West, to the point that many believe his story inspired the myth of the Lone Ranger. Number 4. Calamity Jane, heroine and myth. Martha Jane Canary, known as Calamity Jane, was born in 1852 and grew up surrounded by constant change, road dust, and very little protection. Orphaned while still young, she quickly took on the responsibility of caring for her siblings and discovered that, to survive, she'd have to step into spaces that were almost never offered to women. She rode horses, shot, led wagon trains, and took any job that kept her moving, always on the margins of the rules that tried to dictate how she was supposed to behave. Over time, the real woman got mixed up with the character the public wanted to see. Soldiers and travelers said Calamity was brave and loyal in dangerous situations, while others claimed she exaggerated every deed to impress reporters and onlookers in crowded saloons. Newspapers of the time loved that kind of story and published accounts that blended small facts, scandalous rumors, and pure invention. Each new version added to the mystery. Where did Martha Jane, a flesh-and-blood woman, end? And where did Calamity Jane, the legend of the Old West, begin? That fog between fact and invention kept her name alive. For some, she represents women who push past boundaries. For others, she's the product of fantasy created to sell stories. In the end, every account reinvents her a little, leaving Calamity Jane somewhere between the life she lived and the legend the public held on to. Number 5. The Cannibal of Colorado. Alfred Packer went down in Old West history as the main figure in one of the darkest cases ever recorded in Colorado. In 1874, he joined 5 men on an expedition through the Rocky Mountains in the dead of winter, looking for work, gold, and a safe route. Months later, he reappeared alone in a small settlement, exhausted, oddly well-fed for someone who claimed to have starved, and unable to clearly explain what had happened to his companions. The contradictions in his stories raised suspicions, and an investigation was opened. When the bodies were found near the campsite, partially buried in the snow, examinations and witness statements pointed not only to murder, but also to precise cuts at the joints, typical of someone removing meat for consumption. Confronted with the evidence, Packer claimed he had been attacked by one of the men and said he only reacted, insisting that he resorted to human flesh only to survive the cold and hunger. The jury rejected his self-defense story, and he was convicted and sent to prison. Since then, the case has fueled debates about guilt, necessity, and moral limits in extreme situations, inspiring books, movies, and discussions that still keep the mystery of the so-called Cannibal of Colorado alive today in the collective memory of the state and of Old West scholars. Number 6. The first big train robbery. The year is 1866. In the middle of the darkness, an Ohio and Mississippi railway train pushes forward, trusting in the reliability of the tracks and the protection of a few guards. Outside, John and Simeon Reno watch every move. For weeks, they've been studying the schedules, the cargo, and the crew's routine. It's not a spur-of-the-moment thing. It's a calculated plan. Stop the train, overpower the guards, and open the safe that holds the equivalent of fortunes in land and cattle. When the whistle echoes through the night, the heist begins. The gang climbs aboard, takes down any resistance, and gets away with about $13,000, an amount that for many would mean a whole lifetime of work. The news spreads fast, and the deed quickly takes on legendary status. Some see only the crime. Others feel drawn to the boldness of it, and to the idea that even the symbol of progress could be brought to a halt. The Reno brothers robbery marks the start of a new era. The rails stop being just a symbol of economic growth and become a stage for clashes between law and outlaw. Bandits like Jesse James would learn from this strategy, refining their methods, planning sabotage and escapes. Decades later, stories inspired by this episode would fill newspapers, novels, and Western movies, cementing in popular culture the image of a train being robbed in the dead of night. caught between danger, greed, and the promise of an easy future for a few and a risky one for everyone. Number 7. Johnson County War. In 1892, in the remote state of Wyoming, a conflict left a permanent mark on the history of the Old West. Big landowners, afraid of losing their control over the land and the cattle, started accusing small ranchers of theft, almost always without any proof. To restore order, they hired professional gunmen who were basically given permission to kill in their boss's name. The result was a kind of miniature civil war. Fences were torn down, herds were taken, houses were attacked in the middle of the night, and men were executed at point-blank range, with no chance to defend themselves. Women and children fled in a hurry, leaving behind years of work, memories, and roots. In no time, fear replaced trust, and the region sank into a climate of terror. When the violence got completely out of control, the federal government decided to step in and sent troops to stop the massacre. The intervention didn't erase the losses, but it revealed something essential. In remote territories, the law is usually only as strong as the power of those who control it. Less known than the famous shootout at the OK Corral, the episode of the Johnson County War shows the human cost of American expansion and serves as a warning even today. Whenever justice bows to money and influence, it opens the door for the past to come back in the form of new abuses. Number 8. The invention of barbed wire. Until the 1870s, the Old West still felt like endless open space, with wide plains where cattle from different owners mixed freely without control. For the big cattle barons, that meant profit on the move. For the small rancher, though, every animal lost could be the difference between keeping the family going or having to abandon the land. It was a world where strength and influence mattered more than any ownership document. When Joseph Glidden patented barbed wire in 1873, that reality started to change in a quiet but deep way. Suddenly, a cheap metal wire that was easy to put up made it possible to create clear boundaries where before there had only been marks on the ground and verbal promises. Fences appeared around springs, pastures, and traditional cattle trails, cutting off the long drives that crossed Texas in search of distant markets. What seemed at first like just a practical solution to protect herds quickly turned into a source of conflict. Small and large landowners began fighting for every inch of land, filing lawsuits, tearing down fences, and facing each other in ambushes and shootouts. In just a few years, the vast open landscapes gave way to a patchwork of marked-off properties, shifting the balance of power and deciding who stayed in the game and who got pushed out. Number 9. Belle Starr, the Bandit Queen. Belle Starr, born Myra Maybelle. Shirley Reed grew up in an environment where crime was part of everyday conversation. As a young woman, she spent time around names that would later become legends, like Jesse and Frank James, and she learned early on that fame could come just as easily from a revolver as from newspaper headlines. When she married the Cherokee man Sam Starr, she took a decisive step, joining an organized group of horse thieves in Indian Territory, where the law was weak and boldness was its own kind of protection. With a steady stance and a confident walk, Belle moved through saloons and dusty trails wearing well-kept dresses, a striking hat, and always her pistols at her waist. Official reports described a woman involved in robberies, stolen horse trading, and dangerous alliances, but they also noted her skill in negotiating and escaping traps. In 1889, at age 40, she was killed in an ambush on the road, a crime that was never solved. The lack of answers fueled public curiosity and turned Belle Starr into an Old West legend, a woman who, between danger and independence, chose to live outside the rules and ended up immortalized as a symbol of defiance against the conventions of her time. Over the years, her story became more and more romanticized, cementing her image as the famous Bandit Queen. Number 10. Stagecoach Mary, the woman who delivered the mail. Before becoming a legend of the Old West, Mary Fields was looked at with suspicion. A black woman with a strong personality, she seemed to be everything society of the time didn't want in an official position. Even so, around 1895, she achieved something unprecedented. She became the first black woman hired by the U.S. Postal Service, responsible for carrying letters and packages along the rough routes of Montana. Mary drove her stagecoach carrying a rifle and a revolver. She faced snow, frozen rivers, thieves, and long travel days, almost always alone. The rule was simple. If there was mail to deliver, she'd go. They say that if the path was blocked by ice, Mary would get down, cross the river on foot, and keep going without ever abandoning the load. Over time, the same woman many had rejected became respected for her courage and reliability. Locals knew that if a delivery was in Stagecoach Mary's hands, it would reach its destination. At a time when women, especially black women, were pushed to the margins, she took the road, the center of danger and responsibility, leaving behind a legacy that still inspires those who refuse to accept the roles prejudice tries to impose. Her story is a reminder that courage is also an act of resistance. Number 11. The Ghosts of Body. High in the mountains of California, Body was born from the shine of gold. In just a few years, tents turned into crowded streets, saloons multiplied, and the town drew miners, outlaws, and dreamers who gambled their lives on a roulette wheel or a vein of ore. At night, piano music mixed with fights, gunshots, and whispers in poorly lit alleys. When the gold ran out, the excitement collapsed. Families left in a hurry, businesses shut down, and a series of fires reduced entire blocks to ashes. What remained was a town frozen in the moment its luck turned. Shelves still covered in dust, chairs knocked over, empty bottles lined up behind old counters. Everything seems to be waiting for someone who never comes back. Today, Body is a historic park watched over by rangers and, according to many, by spirits that refuse to leave. Visitors talk about footsteps on creaking floors with no one there, figures in windows, and muffled voices coming from the old saloon. Among ruins and dried-out wooden facades, the wind seems to tell stories of debts never paid, promises broken, and desires that ended in gunfire or loneliness. The legend warns, anyone who takes anything from Body brings misfortune with them until they return it. Maybe it's just superstition, but walking through its silent streets is enough to understand why so many people leave convinced they didn't walk alone. Number 12. Cochise County War. At the end of the 19th century, the remote county of Cochise in Arizona became the stage for a private war. On one side were the cowboys, outlaws used to robberies, ambushes, and intimidation. On the other were Sheriff John Behan and the Earp family, backed by gambler and gunslinger Doc Holliday, all fighting for influence over a wealthy region with almost no state control. The conflict exploded in 1881 during the legendary OK Corral shootout. 30 seconds of gunfire were enough to turn a disagreement into a defining symbol of the Old West. When the smoke cleared, a few cowboys lay in the dust, and the rivalry only deepened instead of ending. In the months that followed, revenge took over the streets of Tombstone. Morgan Earp was shot in the back inside a saloon, igniting the fury of his brother Wyatt. Wyatt gathered allies and launched a relentless manhunt against those he believed were responsible. Witnesses of the time remembered bullets echoing between wooden buildings, saloons, and taverns, while the townspeople hid behind closed doors. That's how Tombstone earned its reputation as a dangerous city, where the law always seemed to arrive too late, and the Cochise County War went down in history as one of the most violent and iconic chapters of the American frontier. Number 13. Billy the Kid and his vandalized grave. William H. Bonney, better known as Billy the Kid, became famous as one of the most talked-about gunslingers of the Old West. According to the official story, he was killed in 1881 by Sheriff Pat Garrett in Fort Sumner, New Mexico, ending a short life marked by shootouts, escapes, and tales whispered in cantinas and ranch houses. As the years passed, the place where he was supposedly buried turned into a spot visited by curious travelers, researchers, and fans of Western legends. Standing before the simple headstone, many try to imagine who that 21-year-old really was. A cold-blooded killer, a rebel against the system, or just another piece of a territory in constant turmoil. But fascination also brought destruction. The grave was vandalized several times, and the headstone was even stolen twice, as if taking that slab of stone meant owning a fragment of the myth. Today, it sits behind iron chains, an attempt to protect it and to preserve the physical trace of a figure wrapped in uncertainty. Even so, the rumors persist. Some claim Garrett killed the wrong man and that Billy escaped, disappearing under another name in some dusty town. For many, that's pure fantasy. For others, it's exactly that uncertainty that keeps interest in his story alive and highlights the thin line between historical record and legend. Number 14. The Legend of the Lost Dutchman's Gold. In the dry deserts of Arizona rises the silent Superstition Mountains. In the late 19th century, a German immigrant, mistakenly nicknamed the Dutchman, claimed to have found a gold mine there of unimaginable value. He kept the secret until his death, leaving behind only vague clues and stories whispered in saloons and campsites. After he died, explorers, drifters, and locals began crossing canyons and hidden trails in search of the lost mine. Dubious maps started to circulate, debated around campfires, while improvised groups set out full of hope and came back in silence, when they came back at all. Over time, belief grew that the region is cursed. Unexplained disappearances, bodies found in ravines, and accidents described as suspicious fueled the fear. Newspapers recorded failed expeditions, reinforcing the idea that something in those mountains prefers to keep the treasure hidden. Even so, the legend doesn't fade. Year after year, new people arrive drawn by the promise of riches and the chance to solve the puzzle that defeated so many before them. Among rocks, scorching heat, and whispered tales of lights appearing at night and voices echoing from nowhere. Every step reminds them that in that place, fortune and disappearance walk side by side. Number 15. The Gambler's Madness. In the saloons of the Old West, the sound of laughter, arguments, and glasses banging on the counter mixed with the clatter of betting chips, while cigar smoke hung over everything like a thick veil. Every table promised either fortune or ruin, but none drew more attention than the one belonging to Canada Bill Jones, the man who seemed to hold conversations with luck itself. A master of the three-card Monte, he moved his hands with such confidence that onlookers barely noticed when they'd already fallen for the trick. Bill had a particular logic to justify his scams. He said it was wrong to leave money with a scoundrel if he knew how to take it first. That idea summed up the spirit of frontier towns, where law and greed walked side by side. Among gunfighters, merchants, gamblers, and almost legendary figures like Doc Holliday, who split his time between a dentist's chair, a deck of cards, and a revolver, stories of risk and desire were born. One decisive bet could turn a nobody into a local legend, or seal his end quietly on the same floor stained with booze and blood where, night after night, the rattle of dice kept echoing. It reminded everyone that in that uncertain world, the line between cleverness and disaster was as thin as the card that decided the final outcome. Number 16. Scams in Ghost Towns. When the gold dried up, the railroads changed routes, and the noise of the saloons gave way to silence, many Old West towns vanished. Houses were abandoned, and only the wind crossed the streets. While some people moved on, others saw the perfect setting to fool anyone still dreaming of easy riches. The scheme followed a familiar script. Adventurers would show up claiming that old mines had started producing again and that a new wave of extraction would revive the local economy. They showed off nuggets bought elsewhere, aged maps, and supposed technical reports. They quoted a renowned geologist who had supposedly confirmed the potential of the land and offered exclusive shares to anyone who got in early. The pitch mixed urgency with the feeling of opportunity. They claimed big investors were watching the area and that time to decide was short. Afraid of missing out, many people sold belongings, emptied their savings, and made generous deposits. Once the money hit the account, the scam revealed itself. The con men disappeared, letters came back undelivered, and the addresses were fake or never existed. In remote areas with little oversight, almost no one was held accountable. For some, these stories became warnings. For others, the promise of quick profit kept speaking louder than any lesson from the past. Number 17. Cherokee Bill. Crawford Goldsby, known as Cherokee Bill, was born in 1876, the son of an African-American man and a Cherokee woman. He grew up surrounded by conflict, prejudice, and a lack of opportunity, an environment that pushed him toward crime while he was still a teenager. In the towns of Indian Territory, present-day Oklahoma, he quickly became known for bold robberies, always carrying a gun and never hesitating to pull the trigger, which made him one of the most feared gunmen in the region. His reputation for constant danger drew the attention of U.S. Marshals, who began hunting him relentlessly. After several escapes and shootouts, he was finally captured and put on trial for killing a man during a fight in a saloon. Sentenced to hang, he heard the verdict with apparent indifference. In 1896, at just 20 years old, he climbed the gallows. He is said to have remarked, before the rope tightened around his neck, "Hurry up with this hanging. I haven't got all day." And that's how the short life of a young man who became a symbol of Old West violence came to an end. His story still sparks curiosity because it shows how the mix of cultures, weak laws, and inequality shaped so many destinies. Behind the outlaw figure was a young man shaped by a world where violence often seemed like the only possible answer. Number 18. The Mysterious Thunderbird of Arizona. In 1890, two hunters traveling through the dry region of Tombstone, Arizona, claimed to have brought down an enormous creature from the sky. They described a winged being with an impossible wingspan, thick skin instead of feathers, and eyes that, according to them, seemed to glow even after death. The news spread quickly through the town, and according to the Tombstone Epitaph newspaper, a photograph was supposedly taken. The body stretched out in front of a barn, flanked by men holding its wings open. No one knows for sure what happened afterward. The photo has never been found in archives, private collections, or museums, though some old residents insist they clearly remember seeing it somewhere. Without physical proof, the story slipped away from the realm of fact and into the territory of imagination. Some swear the creature was a dinosaur that somehow survived through time. Others insist it was a real thunderbird, tied to indigenous legends. There are those who say it was nothing more than a stunt to sell newspapers. Even so, the absence of the missing image kept the story alive. Today, the Tombstone Thunderbird mystery still appears in discussions among enthusiasts and paranormal researchers, always circling the same question. If the photo really existed, where did it go? Number 19. Charlie Parkhurst, the disguised stagecoach driver. Charlotte. Charlie. Darky Parkhurst lived her life being seen as a man, working as a stagecoach driver in California. She wore men's clothing, worked in stables and taverns, and won respect in a profession reserved almost entirely for men. To co-workers and passengers, Charlie was the dependable driver who could get people through a journey even when the road seemed impossible. Day after day, she guided horses along roads and cliffs, carrying letters, money, and passengers. Danger waited around every bend, but her reputation grew after a holdup in which outlaws pointed guns at the stagecoach and ordered it to stop. Charlie kept the reins steady, calmed the horses, and held things together long enough for the escort to react. The story spread across the region and solidified her image as a professional who didn't back down in the face of danger. In 1879, when she died, the secret she had protected for decades finally surfaced. As the community prepared her body for burial, they discovered that the respected driver was actually a woman who had taken on another identity to work and be taken seriously. Later, hints emerged that Charlie may have even voted in a local election, decades before women were legally allowed to vote. By hiding who she was to claim a place denied to her, and possibly even step close to the ballot box, she turned her own life into a quiet act of defiance against the rules of her time. Number 20. The Ice Blizzard and the Great Die-Up. At the end of the 19th century, the winters of 1886 and 1887 hit the Great Plains like a blow no one expected. Until then, ranchers trusted open grazing, believing cattle would withstand the cold and find food beneath the light snow. But that winter was different. The wind brought non-stop blizzards, the ice hardened the ground, and the animals were trapped in silent fields with no shelter and no food. Whole days passed with the cattle walking in circles, exhausted, until they collapsed. Many ranchers watched their wealth disappear in a matter of weeks, unable to reach the herds buried under the snow. Accounts from the time speak of hundreds of thousands of cattle lost, a blow that emptied barns, bank accounts, and hopes. The episode became known as the Great Die-Up and permanently changed the way cattle were raised in the region. After that ice storm, blind trust in open range gave way to fences, feed stores, and planned shelters. The romantic era of cowboys driving massive herds across endless plains was beginning to end, replaced by more careful management that paid attention to weather and the dangers of improvising. On ranches, the memory of that winter became a quiet warning. Nature could be a partner, but it also charged a high price from anyone who insisted on ignoring its signs. Number 21. Marfa Lights, Ghostly Glow in the Desert. In the desert near the small town of Marfa in southwest Texas, residents and travelers have reported strange lights since the late 19th century. Lights that appear out of nowhere and move as if they have a mind of their own. They show up as dots on the horizon, grow brighter, fade, split apart, come back together, and then vanish, leaving everyone in stunned silence. Researchers from the University of Texas have spent nights watching the phenomenon and gathering data. Several explanations have been proposed: headlights from distant cars, mirages caused by temperature differences, atmospheric reflections, gases released from heated soil. But none of these explanations settled the mystery, especially since the earliest reports came long before automobiles existed. While science keeps searching for answers, the imagination of the locals follows its own path. Some believe the lights are spirits trapped in the desert, messages from another world, or echoes of ancient indigenous stories. The fascination is so strong that the local government built a viewing platform facing the plain where the lights usually appear. On clear nights, families and curious visitors park their cars, turn off their headlights, and wait in silence. When, in the distance, a small point begins to glow and dance in the darkness, many describe the same sensation: a chill and the feeling that they're witnessing a secret the desert still isn't ready to reveal. Number 22. The Chinese in the West. During the gold rush and the expansion of the railroads, thousands of Chinese immigrants crossed the Pacific to the United States in the 19th century. They fled poverty and bet everything on the chance to start over. One of them, Li Wen, worked up to 14 hours a day on construction sites, slept in makeshift tents, and lived with the constant thunder of dynamite explosions. They took on jobs almost no one else wanted, carving tunnels through frozen mountains, hanging from cliffs, surrounded by dust, smoke, and cave-ins. In some stretches of what would become the Transcontinental Railroad, around 90% of the workers were Chinese, a sign that America's push westward was only possible because of a labor force that rarely got the credit it deserved. When the tracks were finished and the contracts ended, many headed to cities like San Francisco, Seattle, and Deadwood. There, they opened laundries, food stalls, and small shops that gradually shaped everyday life and the flavors of the region. At the same time, hostility grew. Attacks, insults, and discriminatory laws tried to limit their presence. In 1882, the Chinese Exclusion Act restricted the entry of new Chinese immigrants and made life harder for those already there. Even so, their contribution remained etched into the railroad lines they built, the neighborhoods they helped establish, and the history of a nation that expanded on the strength of their work. Number 23. Buffalo Bill's Show in Europe. At the end of the 19th century, William Frederick Buffalo Bill Cody realized that the fascination with the Old West could earn more than just legends. A former Army scout and buffalo hunter, he gathered riders, sharpshooters, and groups of Native Americans to create Buffalo Bill's Wild West Show, a traveling spectacle that promised to take audiences straight to the prairie. Under spotlights and the sound of rehearsed gunfire, cowboys performed risky rope tricks and fast rides, while indigenous figures like Sitting Bull appeared in staged attacks and chases that mixed entertainment with controversy. When the troupe crossed the Atlantic, the show began performing for European crowds eager to witness that distant West. In London, Paris, and other capitals, massive audiences fought for seats to watch reenactments of stagecoach sieges and duels, advertised as faithful accounts of American frontier life. Records show that Queen Victoria herself attended and was fascinated by the riders' skill and the choreography of the horses, giving the show a mark of prestige and boosting its international fame. At the same time, critics warned that this version of the West reinforced harmful stereotypes about indigenous peoples, turning them into exotic attractions far removed from the real experiences of violence, land loss, and cultural erasure they endured. Number 24. The Outlaws' Resting Place. In the Old West, many outlaws even made demands about their own burials. They wanted to go into the ground with a revolver, a deck of cards, a bottle of whiskey, or anything that had marked their life. They said it would help them keep their reputation in the afterlife. And if not, at least people would remember them the way they lived, armed, addicted to gambling, and ready for the next fight. Over time, several cemeteries turned into almost open-air museums. The graves of famous gunfighters began attracting visitors looking for original relics, like a worn holster or cards stained from use. Some visitors swore they felt a strange chill when touching these objects, as if the outlaw's presence still lingered around. The fame grew so much that treasure hunters started breaking into graves looking for rare guns and valuable souvenirs, even with stories circulating about angered spirits. That's how these Old West cemeteries gained a reputation for being haunted, reinforcing the atmosphere of mystery that surrounds the era. So, after these 24 facts, did this one catch your attention? Tell us in the comments which story surprised you the most. Share the video with anyone who loves good curiosities, and subscribe to the channel to keep traveling with us through the world's secrets.